Well, right now, one state weighing a big change in its justice system and raising the question, will other states actually follow suit? Could we see 20-year-olds tried as minors? Democratic Connecticut Governor Daniel Malloy unveiling a plan to try thousands of 18 to 20-year-olds as juveniles and not adults. The governor thinks prosecuting these nonviolent offenders as juveniles will reduce incarceration rates and ease pressure on the prison system. Our next guest has spent decades working in law enforcement, specifically with juveniles in Washington, D.C. and New York City, and says a change like this is actually overdue. Vincent Schiraldi is now a senior research fellow directing the program in criminal justice policy and management at Harvard University's Kennedy School. It's nice to have you on the program, Vincent. I know you just recently wrote on this in the Washington Post. Why do you think it's a good idea to try 18, 19, 20-year-olds as juveniles?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. First of all, thanks for having me on, Jenna. One is the brains of 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds are not as mature as the brains of fully mature adults. They're just not as developed. So they're particularly volatile, they follow their peers, and they're not future-oriented. And for anybody with a 20-year-old son, that's kind of like a duh statement, right? Everybody knows that about their own kids.
But Vincent, that son, for example, can vote for president and can also actively serve in the U.S. military. So why can he hypothetically do that but not be treated as an adult in the justice system?
Good question. So some things they call cold cognition and hot cognition. Cold cognition stuff you can deliberate over, you can talk to your parents about, other significant adults. Hot cognition stuff that happens very quickly. Driving and crime are two good examples people give mostly. It's very difficult to rent a car before you're age 25, and insurance is extremely expensive. So if you look at those examples, the businesses of America have said not so much on young adults.
So if we look if we look at brain development, which and we've done a couple segments on this, which is really interesting, and we apply it to nonviolent offenses, do you think the same argument should be made for, a 16-year-old that commits murder or rape, for example?
Well, already the juvenile court has a way to take care of people who they think shouldn't be held in juvenile court. So most murderers and rapists now get tried as adults. If you were to raise the age to age 21 for the court, they could have it be semi-permeable the same way. Doesn't mean everybody under age 21 stays in juvenile court any more than everyone under age 18 now stays in juvenile court.
An excellent point. So what do you think are some of the benefits if a state like Connecticut does move towards this? What is the benefit to the state and to the community as you would see it?
Okay, so I was commissioner of probation in New York City, and there's a stark difference between the way we, and when I say we, I mean the courts, the police, probation, everybody treats juveniles and adults. You almost are giving up on adults. It's a very punitive system, very correctional system, whereas on juveniles, it's a lot more rehabilitative efforts being made, and they're not always successful, but they're more successful than not. So if we were to be able to apply that to 18, 19, and 20-year-olds who are still in this sort of nebulous young adult area, I think we can expect fewer people being incarcerated, but importantly, less crime by these young people as well.
It's a very compelling argument, Vincent. We look forward to having you back on the program to talk more about it. We're going to discuss it a little bit more now. Thank you very much. Our legal panel is with us. John Spilbor, former prosecutor, criminal defense attorney, Heather Hampton, a trial attorney. Two familiar faces because we saw this as a topic. I thought this is really interesting. That is a very compelling argument, Jonna, that maybe a 19-year-old shouldn't be put into the adult system. What do you think about that?
There are a lot of moving parts to this argument. On the one hand, I completely agree that we should extend the age in which we hold juveniles liable as juveniles as opposed to adults. For the reason that your other guest said, I mean, there is something different about a juvenile brain, and that most brains don't actually mature until we're in our mid-20s. That's the argument that we use to justify it. However, look how different we have no consistency in this country. In New York, you can consent to have sex at 17, but you can't buy a beer until you're 21. You can drive at 16, but you can't fight for this country until you're 18. Like, how can we have no consistency in how we meet this out?
Should it be consistent across state lines, Heather? Is that part of the issue?
I think that it's certainly something that could be addressed on a federal level, but I think what we have to look at is the practicalities of this. He's talked about the personal issues, the fact that brains aren't fully formed. The issue is the amount of money that we are spending on mass incarceration, and these young people are more likely to reoffend reoffend. So they're going back and back into the system. We need to save that money and go to children's mental health as a big part of this. Spend the money on the front end so we're not spending it on the back end.
And let's go over some nonviolent offenses. For example, drug possession, burglary, for example, could be a nonviolent offense. Jonna, does that mean a 20-year-old that would be treated the same as, let's say, a 13-year-old if you're representing them in court?
Well, I think 13-year-olds would still be handled much, much differently than a 20-year-old. But here's the part that actually makes no sense to me. I don't want to get hate mail for this. If the argument is it's the brain that's the problem, so you're not mature until a certain age, it would make more sense, not less sense, to punish people who do commit violent crimes as kids, and we have a problem wrapping our brains around that.
But that's not the difference in the brain. The difference in the brain is not that this person is pathologic and they're going to be pathologic the rest of their lives. The difference in the brain is that they're less able to control impulses and less able to see the results, the consequences.
There is something a little weird. I mean, can you imagine talking to a 20-year-old and saying you're not going to be viewed potentially as an adult in the court of law? But I mean, for anyone. Granted, some 20-year-olds, maybe that makes sense, but for others, isn't it important to have severe consequences so that they don't go back to a life of crime?
I think there's discretion to be given by judges to determine what is appropriate for each individual person, and we do that now, and we do it more in the juvenile system. In the adult system, there's a lot less discretion. I think that's part of the argument.
Okay, so where do you draw the line? I only have 30 seconds. Some say you draw it up to the age of 25, that you could be given juvenile treatment as a 24-year-old.
Here's the key. At what age are you beyond being rehabilitated? Because that's what we really care about when we're talking about the younger people. Can you be rehabilitated and not thrown out, not have to register as a sex offender for the rest of your life, not have a criminal record following you around so you can't get into college and you can't get a career? What age is that? Is there a cutoff? I don't know if
that's
we can say
a great question.
Yes.
We're going to have to end there with our viewers. I'll be curious what they have to say on Twitter and through our chat as well. It's a really interesting debate.
No hate mail.
No, all fair points. All fair points. Thank you both.
Thanks, Jenna.